Okay, so you know how everyone's always talking about brain training? Like all those apps and programs promising to sharpen your mind?
Yeah, it's a huge industry.
It is. It's massive.
And it's only getting bigger, right?
Right, like billions of dollars. And the projections are pretty wild.
Yeah, they say it could be worth like over 56 billion by 2031.
Yeah, something like that. It's crazy. And a lot of it centers around this idea of speed of processing training.
Right, making you faster, quicker on the uptake.
Yeah, exactly. And they often use tasks like, that useful field of view thing, the UFOV.
Oh yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, the idea is that if you get faster at these very specific exercises, it'll somehow transfer over to your everyday life, make you think faster in general.
Yeah, make you sharper.
Right, sharper. But, it makes you wonder, are these things really boosting your underlying processing speed? Or is there something else going on?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. And that's what we're diving into today. So there's this really cool study from Maugan, Lloyd, Taylor Curley, and Christopher Hertzog over at the Georgia Institute of Technology.
I've heard of them, yeah.
Yeah, they're doing some interesting stuff. This was published back in 2025 in the Journal of Cognitive Enhancement. And it digs into what's actually happening when we do this speed of processing training.
I like it.
Yeah. And the big takeaway for anyone listening is that these brain training apps that promise to speed up your brain might actually be doing something much more specific.
Like what?
Like making you really good at their particular games. You know what I mean?
Oh, interesting. So not actually making you process information faster, but just better at that specific task.
Yeah, potentially. It's definitely something to think about.
Absolutely. We often hear these claims that training on, certain brain games will make you better at everything.
Yeah.
But this study from Lloyd and the others, it really makes us think about the mechanisms behind those improvements.
Yeah, it's not as simple as it seems, right?
Right. They really dug into this idea of perceptual learning. Like, could it be that you're just getting better at perceiving the specific things you're training on? And that's why you're showing improvement on these speed tasks, not necessarily because your brain is actually getting faster.
Okay, so let's talk about the UFOV, the useful field of view task, because it's used in a lot of these programs. Can you break down what this task actually involves? Like if someone's doing a UFOV test, what's happening?
Sure. So picture this. You got a screen and there's a quick flash, like something pops up for a split second. And you have to identify like a shape or a letter in the center of the screen. But at the same time, you also have to notice something else that appears off to the side in your peripheral vision.
Okay, so you have to catch a couple things really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the catch is that right after these things appear, this visual mask pops up on the screen. It's designed to interfere with your ability to see what you just saw.
So it's trying to throw you off.
Exactly. Trying to disrupt that visual information you just took in.
Interesting. So how do researchers track if someone's getting better at this? What are they actually measuring?
So they use this thing called stimulus onset asynchrony, or SOA.
Sounds complicated.
It's really not as bad as it sounds. It's just the time between when those targets appear on the screen and when that disruptive mask shows up. Right. So basically, if you need less time between the targets and the mask to see everything correctly, that's a shorter SOA. And it's usually seen as a sign of faster processing.
Right. Okay. So you want that time to be shorter and shorter, meaning you're processing faster.
Exactly. The shorter the SOA, the faster you seem to be. But Lloyd and his team, they wondered if our brains are really getting faster overall, or if we're just learning something specific about the task itself. Like maybe we're getting better at dealing with that mask or spotting those particular targets.
That's where this perceptual learning idea comes in, right?
Right. And they had a couple of ideas about how perceptual learning might be driving those improvements on the UFOV.
Let's hear them.
So the first one they called diminished masking effects. Remember how that mask is supposed to wipe out the image of the target? Well, what if you see those same targets and the same mask over and over again? Like your visual system might learn to pick up on these faint traces or even after images of the target that kind of linger even after the mask pops up.
Oh, so it's like you're learning to see through the interference in a way.
Exactly. It's not necessarily your brain getting faster overall, but it's learning to see the visual quirks of this specific test. It's adapting to the specific things it's being shown.
So it's more like specialized learning than a general speed boost.
That's a great way to put it.
And I think they mentioned a past study where the researchers themselves noticed this.
Oh, yeah, they did. It was really interesting. Dr. Hertzog, the senior author on this paper, he talked about an earlier study he was involved in. He said that after practicing a similar task with a mask, he could actually start to see features of the target through the mask.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
It is. It's like, your brain is fine-tuning itself to those specific training elements.
Yeah, like those specific targets and masks.
Exactly. And that brings us to the second way perceptual learning could be influencing performance on these tasks. This was a little bit about visual search and how we find things, and it's pretty fascinating.
All right, tell me more.
So they talk about this difference between what are called consistently mapped stimuli, or CM stimuli, and varied mapped stimuli, which is VM stimuli.
CM and VM. Okay, what's the difference?
So CM stimuli, imagine, you're always looking for a red triangle, and everything else is like blue squares and green circles. The red triangle is always the target, and everything else is always a distractor.
Okay, so the rules are consistent.
Exactly. It's consistently mapped. Now, over time, your brain can basically automate that detection. Like the red triangle almost pops out at you. You don't even have to think about it.
Interesting.
And there's a lot of research showing that this pop-out effect is super fast, and it's actually resistant to things like masks. Because you're not really searching anymore, you're just recognizing.
Okay, that makes sense. You've trained your brain to instantly see that red triangle, so even if a mask flashes right after, you've already got it.
Right. But then there's varied mapping, where things get a little more challenging.
How so?
With VM, anything can be the target. One time it's the red triangle, the next time it's the blue square, then maybe it's the green circle. So you can't develop that automatic pop-out response.
Ah, I see. Because the rules keep changing, you can't just rely on that instant recognition?
Exactly. You have to actively search and evaluate every single time.
Okay, so how did Lloyd and his colleagues actually test this? What was the study design?
They had people train on a task that was similar to the UFOV, where they had to identify a letter in the center and also locate a target off to the side. But here's the clever part. They used either CM stimuli, like sets of chess pieces or animals where some were always targets, or they used VM stimuli where any of the images could be a target.
So they had these two different conditions, CM and VM, and they wanted to see how people learned under each.
Exactly. And they also use a really neat method to make sure everyone was performing at a similar level of accuracy. Like they would adjust how quickly that mask appeared based on how well someone was doing.
It sounds like they really wanted to control for individual differences in ability.
Yeah, they were trying to isolate the effects of the training itself.
So then after this initial training, they mix things up a bit, right?
Yes. So some of the people who were training with the CM stimuli, they switched over to a completely new set of CM stimuli.
Oh, so same idea, consistent mapping, but different images.
Right. And some people in the CM group just continued with the same stimuli they've been practicing with. And then they did the same thing for the VM group. Some switched to new VM stimuli, and others kept practicing with the same ones.
Okay, so this is the exciting part. What happened? What did they find?
The results were super interesting.
Uh.
So, as you might expect, the groups using the CM stimuli, they showed much bigger improvements initially compared to the VM group.
Which makes sense if they were developing that automaticity, that pop-out effect.
Right, exactly. But here's the key thing. When the CM group switched over to those new CM stimuli, even though it's still consistent mapping, their performance took a big hit.
Oh, wow. So even though the rule was the same, changing the images threw them off.
Totally. Their reaction times, they went back up to basically the same level as the VM group. And that's a really strong indication that their initial improvement wasn't just about learning some general strategy. It was about learning to recognize those specific chess pieces or those specific animals.
That's fascinating. So it really does point to perceptual learning, like learning the specific visual features being a major factor in how well people did.
Absolutely. And what's even more interesting is that the VM group also showed a performance dip when they switched to new VM stimuli.
Oh, really? So even with varied mapping, there was some degree of learning specific to the images they were seeing?
Yes, exactly. It was a smaller dip than with the CM group, but it was still there. So it seems like there's some perceptual learning happening in both conditions, just that it's much stronger with consistent mapping.
So what does this all mean for those claims we hear about speed of processing training, like actually making our brains faster? It's like we might need to be a bit more cautious about that.
I think so. This research really suggests that a significant part of the improvement we see in these tasks might be down to perceptual learning, to becoming really good at recognizing those specific targets, and maybe even anticipating those masks used in the training.
So instead of a general upgrade to our processing speed, it might be more like we're becoming experts in a very specific visual puzzle.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it. And it also means that the standard UFOV training, with its limited set of stimuli, might actually be amplifying this perceptual learning effect.
Because you're seeing the same things over and over again.
Exactly. Now, to be fair, the researchers do acknowledge that there are likely other factors at play here, particularly in that varied mapping condition.
Yeah, it probably isn't just perceptual learning, right?
Right. Things like improved attention and control probably also contribute to the benefits. But this study really highlights the role of perceptual learning in a way that we might not have fully appreciated before.
And what about all those claims about longer-term benefits and transferring these skills to real-world situations? How does this study fit in with that?
That's a really important question. There are studies out there like the ACQ study that have reported long-term and far transfer effects from this kind of training. But this particular study didn't directly examine those things. It was focused more on what happens during the training itself.
So we can't necessarily say that this study disproves those other findings.
Right. But it does raise some interesting questions, like if a lot of the benefit comes from learning to recognize those specific targets in masks, how well would that transfer to a situation where you're dealing with completely new visual elements?
Yeah, like driving a car or navigating a crowded street. Those are very different from a computer screen with chess pieces and animals.
It's a big leap. And the researchers, they suggest that other factors might be contributing to those broader benefits that other studies have reported. Things like increased confidence in one's attentional abilities, or maybe even counteracting negative stereotypes about aging and cognitive decline. Those things could be playing a role, but they weren't the focus of this particular study.
So the big takeaway here is that while speed of processing training can lead to improvements, the work by Lloyd, Curley, and Hertzog really highlights the idea that learning to recognize the specific elements of the training task is a major, if not the major, driver of those gains.
I completely agree. It really encourages us to think more deeply about what's actually being trained in these programs. Are we really enhancing some fundamental cognitive ability, or are we just becoming really good at a specific game?
Exactly. So for everyone listening, here's something to think about. If a big chunk of the benefit from brain training comes from becoming an expert at the training itself, what does that mean for how we design these programs? And, more importantly, what does it mean for whether those benefits will actually show up in new and different situations that you encounter in your everyday life?
That's a great question.
It is, and there's no easy answer. But hopefully, this deep dive has given you a little more insight into how these brain training programs might work. And maybe it's even sparked your curiosity to go and explore the research on perceptual learning a little further. It's a fascinating area, and it really gets at the heart of how our brains adapt and learn from our experiences.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Food for thought, for sure.
It is. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure. It was a great discussion.
Until next time.
See you then.